Date 2nd January 1935. Day Wednesday. Time 10:20 p.m. Location President Hotel, Kansas City. A front desk clerk received a young man who she believed to have been between the age of 20 to 35. He was well dressed, wearing an overcoat with a brown hair and a visible scar on his scalp. He gave his name as Roland T. Owen. Afterwards, the bellhop Randolph Pross accompanied Owen into the elevator to the 10th floor. He had a little conversation with him, to which he complained about the rates of a nearby hotel being very high. Keep this in mind because this is going to be very important later on in the story. Okay, let's continue. Afterwards, Owen put his items on the sink and the bellhop returned to lock the door and returned to his lobby. He later saw Owen leave the hotel. Mary Soptic, a maid at the hotel, returned the next day to clean room 1046 where Owen was staying. As she entered the room, she noticed that Owen had the shade drawn and left only one dim lamp on, which was a little bit unusual, but she didn't mind. She cleaned the room. Afterwards, she left. This would be the case for several occasions when she encountered Owen in the room where she stayed. According to her quote, she was either afraid or worried about something, and that, quote, he always wanted to kind of keep in the dark. On the morning of January 3rd, which was the next day after Owen stayed in the hotel, Soptic came back at 10:30. The door was locked, and so she assumed there was no one in the room. But as she entered the room, she saw Owen inside the room with the lights turned off, which meant that someone had locked him inside the room. This started to raise questions in Soptic's mind. While Soptic was still in the room, Owen answered the call and said, quote, "No, Dawn. I don't want to eat. I'm not hungry. I just had breakfast." Repeating, "No, I'm not hungry." Again, Soptic came back around 4 to deliver some fresh towels. As she approached the door of room 1046 where Owen was staying, she heard 2 male voices, so she knocked. A voice she described as loud and deep, probably not Owen's, asked who it was. She responded and said, "I have brought fresh towels." And the voice replied and said, "No, we don't need any." Yet, Soptic knew there was no towel in the room as she had taken all herself in the morning. So, she turned and just walked away, still thinking about it because it was a little strange. A few minutes later, Jane Owen, who is not a relative of Roland Owen, checked into the President Hotel. After a long day of feeling sick, she was given room 1048, and later her boyfriend, who also lived around, came to visit her at 9:20 and stayed for 2 hours before leaving. Jane reported that she heard 2 voices, male and female, talking loudly and profanely on the same floor, though there was apparently a party going on at room 1055, which some other people on the same floor testified to that. But things began to get very strange. The next morning on January 4th around 7 o'clock, the hotel phone operator, Bella Ferguson, while preparing for a wake-up call to room 1046, realized that the phone in room 1046 was off the hook for a while without being used. So she sent Pross, the bellhop, to room 1046 to go and check. Despite the room having a do not disturb sign on the door, Pross knocked a few times and heard a low voice say, quote, "Come in, turn on the lights." However, the door was locked and no one was coming to unlock it. So after knocking a few times without any response, Pross said, "Put the phone back on the hook," and headed downstairs, assuming Owen was maybe drunk. Around 8:30 a.m. on the same day, about an hour and a half later, the phone was still off the hook. So Ferguson once again sent another bellhop, Harold Pike, to room 1046. The do not disturb sign was still hanging on the doorknob. After knocking a few times with no response, he let himself inside the room with a master key. The man was lying naked in the dark, seemingly drunk. Not wishing to deal with him, the bellhop simply straightened the phone and placed it back on the hook. He locked the door behind him, reporting Owen to his manager. At approximately 10:30 a.m., the phone was once again off the hook. So the phone operator, Ferguson, sent the original bellboy, Randolph, to check. The do not disturb sign was still on the doorknob, but this time Randolph had a key, so he just opened and let himself in. And what he saw was very horrible. Yes, he stumbled upon a very horrifying scene that still remains a mystery till today. As he opened the door, he found Owen on his knees and elbows, 2 feet away. His head was blooded, and blood baths splattered across the bathroom walls and the main room. According to him, when he opened the door, he stumbled upon a truly horrific scene. Here is his statement to the police, quote, "When I entered the room, this man was within 2 feet of the door on his knees and elbows, holding his head in his hands. I noticed blood on his head and then turned the light on. I looked around and saw blood on the walls, on the bed and in the bathroom. This frightened me, and I immediately left the room and went downstairs." Pross quickly went downstairs for help. After the assistant manager called the police, Dr. Harold Flanders and a detective were the first people on the scene. Owen had been bound with cord around his neck, wrist and ankle. His neck had further bruising, suggesting someone had been attempting to strangle him. He had been stabbed more than once in his chest, above his heart. Harold Flanders, the doctor, also observed that one of the wounds had punctured his lung. Also, blows to his head has left a skull fracture on the right side, which was very terrifying. Remarkably, Owen was still alive. So Dr. Flanders cut the cord from Owen's wrist and asked him, "Who had done this to you?" "Nobody," Owen answered. He then asked him, "Then what caused the injuries?" He said he had fallen and hit his head on the bathtub. After asking the barely conscious Owen if he had tried to kill himself, he said no and lost consciousness. He was then rushed to the hospital, but he was completely comatose and died shortly after midnight on January the 5th, leaving police a baffling mystery to unravel, which still persists till today. After the doctor performed an autopsy on Owen's body, it was discovered that he had died from his wounds. But doctors did not just examine the body but also the blood stains in the room. He estimated that the wounds had been inflicted between 4 and 5 a.m. that day, which means the wounds had been inflicted way before the first bellhop went to the room. Okay, so you remember the issue of the phone being off the hook several times? Doctors believe that was an attempt from Owen trying to call for help, but hadn't been able to make it further past picking up the phone due to his injuries. When investigators searched the room, the strangeness continued. There was no clothes in the room, and nothing matching the description of Roland T. Owen when he checked in. The hotel amenities such as soap and toothpaste were also missing, as well as anything that could have been the murder weapon. The only thing of note that detectives found were 4 small fingerprints which they believe had been a woman's on the telephone stand, though they were never identified. After many investigations and not so much evidence found, the Kansas City police sought help through the press. Both of the city news carried the story on their front page, and the news began to spread. There were no doubt that someone was mixed in this, Detective Johnson told the reporters, confirming that the case was considered a homicide and the person who did it was still to be found. When Owen initially checked into the hotel, he mentioned he was from Los Angeles, but Los Angeles authorities were unable to find any records of Roland T. Owen, bringing into question whether that was the victim's real name. It soon became apparent that Roland T. Owen was not the victim's real name. Later, his body was placed for viewing in the Melody McGilly Funeral Home. As the story spread, more people began reaching out to the Kansas City authorities to see if their missing loved one could be Owen, to no avail. A woman also called the hotel president to ask what Roland T. Owen looked like. She told the Dex he lived in Clinton, 50 miles southeast of Kansas City, but never heard from him again. Wide service began picking up the stories, and it ran in newspapers and radio around the country, with requests to send photographs to Kansas City. More leads on the man's identity came in as a result, and the KCPD had to devote a considerable time to correspond with the police all over the country via mail and telegram to follow up the leads, but eventually they were able to eliminate many. Later, officers recalled Probst the bellboy account that on his way to room 1046 after he checked in, the man had said he had left the nearby hotel after one night due to the high rates and checked with the hotel staffs. But unfortunately, no Roland T. Owen had checked in. But staff recalled a man of Owen's appearance checking in under the name Eugene K. Scott, also giving Los Angeles address and requesting a room on the interior of the building, which was similar to the request he made in the President Hotel. But again, after investigation, the LAPD reported that there was no one by the name in their city. The mystery seems to have when a man identified the body as his cousin. But then, when the man's sisters came to view the body, she confirmed that the cousin had died, in fact, 5 years later. The resemblance between them was very strong. Next, police focused on the mysterious Don that Owen referred to several times while in the hotel. Don was also conceivably the man with the deep voice that the maid heard through the hotel door. Nevertheless, the police search returned no results. Within a few days, 2 new homicides in the city drew detective attention away from the case. Even as more were assigned to the homicide squad, leads were still followed, but less rigorous than they had been in the weeks after the case, and none of them yielded any significant results. Newspapers' coverage likewise dwindled. Finally, the case ran cold, and the detective decided to bury the body. The case returned to the newspaper on March 3rd when the funeral home where the body had been kept announced it burying the man in the city's Potter's Field in the next day. That day, the funeral home received a call from a man who asked the funeral to be delayed so they could send the funeral home the money for a grave and service at the Memorial Park Cemetery in Kansas City. But what is strange is that the caller said, "So the man would be near my sister," which was strange. The funeral director wanted the caller to report it to the police. The caller said he knew, and that did not bother him. The funeral director then asked why Owen had been killed, and luckily, the caller was slightly forthcoming. According to the caller, Owen had an affair with one woman while engaged with another. The caller and the 2 women apparently arranged the encounter with him at the President's in order to exert revenge. Cheaters usually get what is coming for them, the caller said, and hung up. Whether the caller was telling the truth or not still remains a mystery. The funeral was pronounced unsure on March 23rd. Money bundled in a newspaper was delivered to the funeral home from an anonymous sender. But as if that was not strange enough, funeral flowers were anonymously arranged with the Rock Flower Company along with a card that said "Love Forever Lois" placed on Owen's grave. Eventually, the funeral was held shortly afterwards. Beside the officiating minister, the only attendees were police detectives and some who served as pallbearers. Other detectives posing as grave diggers staked out the grave for the next several days, but no one came to visit. Instead, authorities were about to make the biggest discovery of this mystery so far. After a year and a half of the man's image circulating nationwide in the hope of identifying him, one of these did. In 1935, a friend of Ruby Ogilvie found an American weekly piece chronicling the Owens case. Upon looking at the magazine, correctly identified Owen as her son, who left Birmingham in 1935. Owen's actual real name was Otmos Ogilvie, and he was only 17 years old. Ruby Ogilvie quickly contacted the KCPD and was able to provide enough information about the previous pseudonymous corpse, including a description of his head scar, which he explained was as a result of a childhood accident in which some hot grease spilled on there. While the question had been answered, Ruby's account raised more questions. She had received several letters purportedly from his son after he had been killed. The first in early 1935. Postmark in Chicago arose her suspicion since it was typewritten as a colloquial style that was not consistent with his son's previous letters. In May 1935, another letter purportedly from Otmos said he was going to Europe. It was followed by a special delivery letter saying that his ship was sailing that day. Both were sent from New York, which raised another question of who was behind the sending of those letters. Information developed through the police conversation with Ruby Ogletree, Otmos Ogletree's mother, helped them establish a third hotel in Kansas City where Otmos had already stayed, which is St. Regis. There he had shared a room with another man. Whether the man was Don or not could not be established. Also in 2003, John Horner, a local historian at the Kansas City Public Library, received a call from someone out of the state who said they had been helping to inventory the belongings of an elderly person who had recently died. Among them was a shoebox which turned out to be filled with newspaper clipping, as well as, according to them, one item mentioned in the newspaper story. The caller neither identified themselves nor the items. Anna did not make this public until the conclusion of the second two posts he made on the library's blog retelling the story in 2012. Lately, there had been many theories concerning this story, but let's take a look at a few of them. The absence of the suspect in this case had inspired the rise of several theories. The man referred to as Don beat Ogletree to death in room 1046 and acted alone. As mentioned before, it came to light that shortly before his death, Ogletree had stayed in a different city hotel with another man, possibly Don. Don was considered the man with the deep voice that they made heard through the hotel door. But even if this theory is true, the police were never able to figure out who Don actually was. The unknown Don didn't act alone. This theory relates to an observation by Charles Blucher, the elevator operator the night of the murder. His observation also perhaps shed a little light on who Don could be. The night of the murder, Blucher saw Coates, a commercial woman, going to the 10th floor. The elevator operator estimated that the woman was 135 pounds and about 5.5 feet tall. She had dark hair and was wearing a coat of black Hudson seal or imitating Hudson seal. The second theory is that Blucher claimed this woman was looking for room 1026 to meet a man she was unable to find. It's possible that the woman was looking for Ogletree and had mistaken room 1046 for 1026. This commercial woman was also seen with a man from the 9th floor, a man that the elevator operator said was the same height as the woman, and some speculate that this man could be Don. If you recall, there was a fingerprint potentially from a female found on the phone stand, and a woman staying next door in room 1048 reported hearing loud female and male voice cursing. So it wouldn't be unreasonable to suspect that this commercial woman and the man from the 9th floor could have been responsible for what happened to Otmos Ogletree. However, there was nothing official on the woman and the man beyond what's little on the internet. The third theory come from the Sensation article published in the following years that suggests Ogletree was killed for being unfaithful to his fiancée. According to Sensation article published in the Newcastle Sun called The Mystery Murder of Room 1046, that sequence of events went a little differently. The article stated that a woman called the local newspaper to say, quote, "You have a story in your newspaper that's wrong. Roland will not be buried in the papa's grave. Arrangements had been made for his funeral." When asked to identify herself and what actually happened to the man still known as Owen at the time, she replied, "Never mind, I know what I'm talking about. He got into a jam," before hanging up the phone. At the same time, a man called the funeral parlor when Owen was held and said, "Don't bury Owen in the papa's grave. I want you to bury him in the Memorial Park Cemetery. Then he will be close to my sister." The man explained apparently that Owen has jilted a girl he was engaged to, and that in room 1046 Owen and the jilted girl had a little meeting. Before hanging up, he said, quote, "Cheaters usually get what's coming for them." Shortly after, the Rock Floral Company received a call asking for 13 American Beauty roses sent to Roland's funeral. The voice ended, "I'm doing this for my sister." Whether all these theories were true or not is still unknown.